Right, brilliant. It's 6 o'clock and hello to everyone. Very much appreciate you all being here. Today we are going to talk about tire pressure monitoring systems and looking at those in the context of our AiM setup. And so just so I know that everyone can hear me in the chat box, if someone can give a thumbs up, yes, you can hear me, that'd be fantastic. Perfect, thank you very much. And what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on effectively the systems that are available from AiM Technologies, and we're going to talk about that a little bit as we go through. But in many respects, hopefully we'll be able to look at three key elements today. We're going to look at how to set these up in configuration point of view. We're going to have a look at how to be able to create driver alerts or information that you can have as a driver when you're on track so that you can actually identify if you've got a puncture, for example, or something like that. And then the third thing is we're going to start an introduction into some analysis of this data. Now, the analysis of the data could take an entire hour or 2 or 3 hours itself. So we're going to start off today with a quick overview, and likely there will be a part 2 or more of these presentations where we talk about setting up the views and getting a good idea of how to analyze this data. So what I'm going to do is I am going to share my screen. Let's have a look, and I'm going to click on share, and now you should see a picture of me, which is nice, on in a car. And let's just project this, and it always does this, so let's just swap these around. Right, so quick yes, if you wouldn't mind, in the chat box that you can see the presentation. Yep, thank you to Andy. That's brilliant. So this is what we're going to talk about today. Now, I've used AiM systems for a long time now, and for a very long period of time, tire pressure was always something that I wanted to get my hands on, but it was actually a very cost prohibitive part of racing, especially if you were a club racer. Tire pressure monitoring systems oftentimes could have cost the same amount as your entire AiM setup, if not more. And we were talking thousands. I was racing in the US at the time, so I was talking thousands of dollars. But one of the things that's happened most recently in the last few years is that the price point of these TPMS systems, so to speak, have come down quite considerably in price, which is fantastic. And so as a result, one of the things that we're going to focus on today is being able to look at how we set up these, very cost-effective mechanisms that could answer many of the questions that we have as racers, which is, what's the right tire pressure to be able to have in whatever conditions, or how much increase did we see in tire pressure throughout the session, or interestingly start looking at temperatures as well, because I think tire temperatures, especially in the class that I run, has as much of an impact as sometimes pressures, and they're obviously tied together, and we'll look at that a little bit more in the detail. Now, as we go through today's presentation, I would ask that you keep yourselves on mute, just in case anyone happens to wander in or have a conversation about something else, and so that's very much appreciated. But without further ado, let's get on with it. Now, what I will also say is that I know that a good friend of mine, Matt Romanowski, is here. He's trailbreak.net. He does a lot of webinars in the US. I saw him join the audience, and Matt is someone who's taught me an awful lot about these systems, and in the US is a well-known sort of retailer of AiM products. And so I think that anyone who wants to have a little chat through the conversation in the chat box, please go ahead. I'm sure there's going to be folks from AiM there as well as we go through. And if there's any questions at the end we haven't answered, we'll take a chance to be able to get to some of those as well. So as said, today we're going to cover just the system overview itself. I think it's very important that we actually have a look at compatibility as well, because the TPMS systems use a port on our AiM setups that can be used for many things. And so it's important to be able to identify what kind of setup you have and whether your system is compatible with being able to use some of these systems. Then we're going to have a look at actually how we configure these in Race Studio 3, because I'm going to start using language and terminology like CAN protocols, and later on I might use conversations like status variables, all of which I remember when I've been thinking about any of these softwares, oftentimes seem a little bit foreign language, so to speak, or sometimes a bit intimidating. So we're going to look at some of those conversations because it could be easier, but at the same time, want to make sure that it's nice and clear as to how that works. We're going to have a look at then setting up the dash. We're going to look at something called status variables, which many of you may know, some of you may not, and alarms, and how to use that information to be able to help the driver. Because, you know, I just happened to be running a race over the last weekend, and one of my fellow racers said it was really interesting doing the last 5 or so laps with a puncture. But what was interesting is that puncture might have been getting worse and worse and worse, and they may not necessarily have known until the end of the race. And so how do you get it so that you can actually start alerting the driver in the car you happen to have a puncture, or your front left is down, or whatever need be. The other area of that being useful is it may also help us process of elimination when we're in the car to be able to identify if something truly is wrong, because we may have felt that we had a puncture when we haven't, and it could be something else. And then the last thing we're going to have a look at is we're going to start looking at some data analysis. Now, the beauty of having these tire pressure monitoring systems is that just like in our street cars, they do a really good job of being able to tell us what the pressures are and the temperatures are of our tires. But each one of these is a channel that we can start developing and understanding information that we can use as racers to be able to inform many of the conversations that we have. The biggest question that I answer every single morning with the team when I race is what pressures should we set the tires at this morning? So this may start helping us identify some of those sort of questions as we go through. So let's continue. So just a quick overview. The solutions that you get from AiM Technologies, it's all aimshop.com, are tire pressure monitoring systems that measure variables in the valve. And so you can actually see when you look at the picture of these devices, all of the information is cleverly held within the valve of the actual tire. And so that's where the pressure and the temps are measured. Now, some will argue that that's not as accurate as some of these more expensive systems, because now we're looking at £350 here for a system for getting this in your car. There are still thousands of pounds worth of variables that measure different points across the surface of the tire and different variables within the actual of the overall setup. But today we're going to be looking at the ones that are most cost effective. And so all of that information is gathered and worked out in the valve of the tire. You will get from these systems two things which I think are really useful. You actually get 3 variables get sent to you. By each wheel, you will get the tire pressure, the tire temperature, and the battery life of the sensor. Now, the battery life of the sensor is very useful to have, just so that you know if your battery's running out. And I've been told by my by the folks at AiM that this will last for at least a couple of years. But I would make sure that when you buy these, you know the lifespan of that. But you also get the battery level. What you're going to do with these systems is you're going to connect via your AiM devices via the ECU port. Now, this is important because it starts to identify how many ports you have on your AiM device to be able to plug this in. And if you're somebody like me who has an ECU port that you weren't using because you were using analog channels on a 30-year-old car, this worked really well. But if you're somebody who's using a device where you've already got your car's ECU plugged into your AiM device and you don't have a second port, then you will not be able to use these systems. So it's very important to be able to identify what kind of setup you have and whether these things that you can use. That being said, a quick phone call, I'm sure, to the folks at AiM anywhere around the world, and they'll be able to help you identify what is right. The other thing you're also going to need to get comfortable with is the word a custom CAN protocol. Now, this sounds a little bit interesting for many of us. It was the first time I've ever used one of these. I'm not as sophisticated as many who use these type of services. So don't worry, it's as straightforward as downloading a file and then uploading it into the Race Studio 3 software. Now, before we get on, I want to talk about that system compatibility, because I put a video up on YouTube a little while ago, and there were a series of questions that came back and said, is my device compatible? Now, I've put a very high-level view here, but as I put in the note here, and it's a caveat, please make sure that you talk to AiM before you buy one of these systems to make sure it will work with your overall setup that you have, because effectively, it's how many ports you have in terms of being able to plug in ECU information. If you happen to be using an AiM Solo 2, or in the case of me, I've got an AiM Evo 4S, which is in my particular vehicle, I have one ECU port. And so as a result, I'm only able to use that port for these tire pressure monitoring, which for me is perfect. But if I happen to be in a car that had an ECU and I had an Evo 4S, I wouldn't have a port for the TPMS system. That said, it is an interesting sort of crossover in terms of age of vehicle and what you have, that the more modern your vehicle, you may be getting tire pressure monitoring information from your car's ECU anyway. And I have set up dashes for people who've got more modern day BMWs, for example, which is one I set up, but I'm sure it's with many vehicles, where you actually get that information through the car's ECU. And so it's important just to identify where that information is coming from. Also, it's important to be able to identify that there's no way of being able to add an ECU expansion port. It's not like a data hub where you can plug more into it. And so it's also important to bear that in mind as you go through. But I want to make sure this is clear up front, to make sure this is something that is aware. Now, these things could change over time, and I'm sure they are. The conversations I'm hearing many times is that can evolve over time, and a lot of the more modern day devices that are coming from AiM will have more than one opportunity to plug in ECU information. Just to demonstrate, and I don't know if you remember this slide from the last webinar we did when we were talking about configurations, we were talking about this concept of a CAN network, a connected AiM network of devices. And you can see here that I have green, which is data that's going into the device, and then I have the red arrows, that is data that is going out and is feeding into a dash in my case, or feeding a smarty cam or any kind of data capture. And you can see here that I happen to have a tire pressure monitoring system that's plugging into the ECU of my particular vehicle. So that's what I'm using my port for. Everything else that I have is an analog sensor that's plugging in, or it's just a sensor that's attached to the brake pressure and the wall pressure and so forth. But it's important to be able to identify, and I just wanted to be able to demonstrate that this is my actual setup and where we have the tire pressure monitoring system attached to my particular vehicle. So with this in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flick to the screen, and you should still see what I'm looking at. And what I'm going to do is I am first and foremost going to give you a couple of rundowns of some setups of where the tire pressure monitoring system is set up within a vehicle. Then what we're going to do is we are going to set one up from scratch using an AiM Solo 2 DL, just as a quick way of being able to set it up. But I wanted to be able to show what I'm talking about when you get a lot of this information. And so the first thing I want to be able to address is what we call the CAN protocol, or the custom protocol that is there. And so what I've got here is I've actually got the AiM shop website that's open. And if you buy one of these devices, you'll just click on any of these items. So in this instance, I'm clicking on as you scroll down, you will find here that there's a section called downloads. Now, wherever you get your tire pressure monitoring system, and sort of obviously in this instance, this is coming from the aimshop.com. If you click on downloads, you've got the opportunity here of seeing this TPMS CAN protocol. If you click on that, you'll notice on my machine, it just downloads a file. Now, in many instances, that's all you need to do in this particular area, but it's an important step to be able to know this is happening, because what you're effectively doing is you are creating the language, or you're creating the script or the protocol to be able to tell Race Studio 3 to know how to let your tire pressure monitoring system talk to your AiM device. So that's a very important step that we're looking at, and it's key that we do this. Once you've downloaded that, the next thing you're going to go into is you're going to use a button that I have never used before until I set up my tire pressure monitoring system. Can't see your screen, only your image. Oh, if I stop sharing. Thank you for letting me know, Miles. I appreciate that. Let me can everyone see my screen, or is it just an image that's showing up? Just want to make sure. Just a few people could comment. That would be great. I did just get a Zoom message saying my internet was having a bit of a moment. Screen is visible. Are you seeing, it looks like a Race Studio 3, lovely. So it looks like it's come back again. If it happens to go off again, please let me know so that I don't blab on for ages and you can't see what I'm actually showing. Every now and again, Zoom has this sort of momentary sort of slowdown. And so Miles says he can only see you and the backdrop, which is interesting. Miles, I'm not sure if there's a way of being able to either rejoin or just click off. It went off for a few seconds. Maybe there's a screen that you can click on, but if everyone else can see it, hopefully we're good right now. It's all okay. Thank you. So we'll get going. Thank you for that. And if you do either log out, log back in, you should be all right from that point of view. Okay, lovely. So I've just downloaded that CAN protocol that's there. And as I said, there was a button that I barely ever used beforehand. Many of you may be more familiar than I am. And I clicked on here. And what this is doing is it's giving the opportunity of bringing in that information, which I'm going to use later. So you can see I've already imported the one that works because this is my actual Ray Studio 3 that I use. But if you needed to, you just click on that button there, click on protocol file. I put it on my desktop. There's the file. And then you open it. And you open it and it appears here. Now, the beauty of that appearing here is now that's the information you need to be able to continue with all of the information moving forward. And so there's a question that's come up, says, I want to edit the TPMS protocol. What's the password? I don't know the answer to that one, but I'm hoping somebody from AiM may be able to help answer the question that's there, or we'll pick that up afterwards as we go through. This is the way we've set that up. And so the next thing, now we've got this set up in the custom, we never need to go to this page again. Or I haven't gone to this page again since the 30th of June, 2020. When I first put these in, and it's beautiful that it's there, and that's all we need. So we're going to go back to our configurations that we have. And so now that we've added that in, the next thing we can do is we can go to the ECU stream. So this is an Evo 4S AiM webinar, but this is actually the Evo 4S setup that I've cloned and then made an example for today's webinar. Then I've gone to ECU stream and I can click on this and I can find the ECU. And because I brought in that custom CAN protocol, you can see that now there's this thing that says AiM Technologies. You'll find it on your list and it will say custom CAN that is there and it'll say TPMS. And if you click OK on that, then you get all of these new channels. Now, if you remember at the beginning, I said that you get certain key pieces of information that comes through. You get tire pressure per wheel, you get tire temperature per wheel, and you get the battery of each of the particular items, which is useful for being able to log how much battery is left in your particular device. Now, as you go forward, you can then start saying, well, these are channels that I can use to be able to set up the rest of my particular information that is there. So that's what you have. Now, if you happen to be using a device that has more than one port, and you happen to be somebody who may be setting up a more modern day vehicle. On this one, I set this one up to be using an ECU coming in from a vehicle, but you can also identify that if you have, this is an MXL2, but if you have any of the devices that have more than one port for you to be able to add this information in, you can see that on the main ECU stream, I've mapped a BMW Mini and I have all of this information that is available here. But then on the second, I have actually then added in a second stream, which then brings in that TPMS data that is there. So now you can see that if you're one of the people who has a setup that allows you to bring in two streams of information that feed in, you can set up both of these at the same time. So now you can see the difference between both of these. And I'll set this up as we go through from scratch so you can see that, but I wanted to be able to show you what we're doing here. Now, the next thing we want to be able to have a look at is to be able to say, well, what do we want to be able to do with this data for the driver? If you remember, we said the three things we're going to look at is getting the data into our setups. The next thing we're going to do is starting to set up a view that allows us to be able to give the driver information on track. And if you've ever heard me talk about dashes and things that drivers have on track, in my view, you should only have the bare minimum of information you need the driver to know when they're on track and nothing more, because the number one thing that you want to be doing as a driver on track is driving and looking around and making sure that you're not distracted by your dash. And so it's really important to be able to identify what information you do need and what you don't need. And so I'm going to show you that information now as we set up, sort of look at a view. Now, we're going to focus on this MXL2 that I have here. And if you think about the view that shows up for drivers, typically it is going to be the display. So this is a display. I'm configuring a display for an AiM MXL2 with that information that's coming in from that particular feed or series of feeds that I have. This one's coming in from both the BMW Mini and the TPMS system, but I wanted to show you a different sort of view. So the first thing you'll see that is on here is that I actually have a main page that's set up with information that brings in information such as your water temperature, your fuel, battery. It's funny, this is almost identical to the setup that I had. Unfortunately, I didn't have the TPMS at the time, but when I had an MXL2, this is the information that I wanted to be able to know. And this is the view that I set up. And each one of these that I click on, I can choose a source of data to be able to change that. So, if I wanted oil pressure, I click on that. I can say this is either coming from a channel that I have, but I can go up, for example, to the ECU, and I may be able to find, oil in here, which is, it's actually probably not a setting that's available here, but I can choose any of these to have. And so we've got oil here, and I can click on OK, and it just adds that channel that's in there. So that's how you set up your dash. And we've talked about configurations before. But the next thing I've actually set up is the next page. And as you click on the next page, one of the things you may notice is that I've changed this view to have front left tire pressure, front right tire pressure, rear left tire pressure, and rear right tire pressure. And to be able to do that, I've selected these particular views that I want, and all I've done is I've clicked here. I've then gone into the second ECU stream, and I've picked whatever I want in terms of this area. I could put temps if I wanted to, but I've actually put the pressures in here. So now where I'm on track, if I press the button just once, I can have this as my main page with my oil or my fuel, my battery and water temp, or I can then click it once and I can get a different view to be able to tell me what information that is happening on track about what's happening with my tire pressures. Now, obviously, tire pressures is an interesting thing. We could do temps, and depending on the car or the type of tires that you have, you may change the type of view you want. Plus, all of these are customizable for what you need. But this is how you may start thinking about setting this up. And just to give you a demonstration, if you happen to be somebody who's using an Evo 4 instead or Evo 4S, same scenario. This is my actual car setup that I have here. One of the things that you may know is that we set these, we have a GS dash, which plugs into an Evo 4S. But you can see the same setup as HAM3. This is my main page that I have. This is a testing configuration I have. So it just tells me water temp, oil pressure, and speed. And these are all coming in from the analog channels that I have actually set up on my vehicle. And you can see that I can, if I click on water temp, it's coming in from the channels plugged into the device, and then the water temp sensor that I've got set up. One of the things you also notice here is I've got a second page. And what I've done on this one is I've set it up so that if I click on any of these, notice it's coming in from that ECU stream that's coming in, and now I have pressure on the front left. And so if I'm on track at any given time, something weird is happening and it starts to feel unusual, I can click through on one click on my race dash and I can see what's happening with the tire pressure. This is also very useful for me as I'm coming in. And one of the things that we always think about is if we do a cool down lap and then we come into the pits and then there's somebody standing there with a tire pressure gauge who wants to be able to figure out what your tire pressures are. Well, depending on how long the track is and how long your in-lap is, your tires may have cooled during that period of time. But at any given time, you can just flick this in the case of what I'm doing here, or you could do it with that other example I showed you on the MXL2 or any dash that you have. You can see the actual pressures of your tires there and then. Now, granted, this is going to be in your data file for later on, but it's right there for you to be able to use. So as a driver, you can get a really good idea once you come in, just finished your fastest lap, or you need to cool down your tires or whatever need be. You have so much more information available to you on your actual dash. Now, remember, I always thought tire pressure monitoring systems, and I thought modern day cars and everything. This car was built in 1988. Yet based upon the setup that I have here, I'm getting tire pressure information at the exact moment that I need it, actually in the car, which is a very useful thing to be able to have. And so this is a sort of a view in terms of what we can give the driver. But there's a lot of other things that we want to be able to work through that we need to think about. Now, earlier on, I mentioned that we may want to start thinking about some kind of alarm or some kind of warning, just like tire pressure monitoring systems in our cars. Where they're really useful, but also give you that moment of complete discontent is when they tell you that you've got a puncture. And it's a real nuisance, but at the same time, when you're in a street car, hopefully it's easier to be able to sort of either stop or to be able to understand what to do. When you're in a race and seeing what's going on, that information is very interesting to know because you might approach a corner going a little bit faster than your deflated tire will allow, and this might actually be a very useful thing from a safety point of view. And so we're going to talk now about understanding sort of like information we can use from an alarm point of view. So in my setup here, I actually have something set up called a status variable. And if I click here, I've got 3 status variables as set up. Now, I could do a webinar, or if anyone's interested, we could do a webinar later on in terms of setting up status variables versus alarms and what's the difference in terms of what they need. The reason I use a status variable versus just an alarm in the car is that a status variable will allow you to log that information. So I can actually start to see when the tire pressure, actually the alarm triggered when I run an entire session. Oftentimes something may happen in your car with an alarm, and when that condition is no longer met, it disappears and you don't know it's happened. But if you have a status variable, you're always going to have a log, which is this little MEM or memory button, which will log in the actual logged channels as part of your file and your data download. So if you click here, you'll notice if I click on this one, I have a tire pressure alarm that comes up that says if any of these conditions are met, please sort of flag, create a status variable that is in the on position that says, I have a flat tire. And so in this instance, the PSI on I use a Ford, and this is on a Formula Ford, the optimal tire pressure we usually run in the dry, 20 PSI, something like that. If it's wet, it may be 25, 30 PSI, whatever need be. So if you know you're dropping down to 14, that's lower than you probably would set your tire pressures at the beginning, and at the same time you would also never set it that low when you start out in the morning. It would never get that high. So anything, and you know what that threshold is going to be for your vehicle. So if there's a particular point where you drop down to a certain point, you know that there's a problem with the tire. It's either a slow puncture or it's leaking air quite considerably. So this will just create a status variable, but it's not necessarily an alarm yet. But the reason I got it set up here is it allows me to be able to understand this. So that's the first thing, but I need it to be an alarm. So I'm going to go back to my dash, going to click on shift lights and alarms. And now what I have here is I have an opportunity to say I have a puncture alarm. So if I double click here, the puncture alarm is when that status variable I just set up. So if I click here just to show you what channel it is, if anyone's comfortable with setting up alarms, it's a status variable, it's the tire pressure alarm. And when that is triggered, please flash LED3 continuously red and pop up a message that if this nice warning light gets away, that says puncture. You can have anything on there. You've got a puncture, your tire's going flat, don't drive so fast, whatever you want to be able to do. And I've got it so it says condition is no longer met, but chances are the tire's not going to inflate itself. So it'll stay on until you do something about it. So now I have the opportunity of using this tire pressure monitoring system to be able to start to identify how I'm actually driving and what I can actually do if there's a certain sort of emergency that exists that is on track. And so this is a really good way of being able to use these systems as much as you can. Now, if you wanted to be able to see it on the MXL2 that I set up as a different sort of scenario, this is a different dash, but same sort of principle applies. I'm going to go to shift lights and alarms. And just to show you something that was slightly different, I set this one up just as an alarm. So if you click on here, this is my puncture alarm. It's the same as the one I had set up beforehand, which basically says tire pressure front, left, front, right, and any of these are met, and they're less than 15 PSI, because I anticipated that this was going to be something that happened. Then at the moment, I've got it set up as output and open a circuit. Now you could have that as a light that comes up on your dash, but at the same time, we want to be in a position where that actually gives us information that allows us to control that particular variable. So typically what I like to do here is, you can set something off that will create a flashing image. You can create your lights. In this instance, if I remember rightly, I set it up so LED4 and LED5 will illuminate, and you've got a message that says you have a puncture, and that shows up on the screen in terms of the alarm that is there. And so as a result, you have that opportunity of being able to do this, even if you don't want to use a status variable. I just love using that status variable because it always logs when the alarm is registered. So you can go back to your data file and be able to say, oh, that happened on lap 5 out of 12. or in the case of a puncture, I'm sure it's something that you probably want. It happened on lap 4 out of the 4 laps that I drove before I came in because the tire was flat. But at the same time, it gives you that opportunity of being able to use that. And so you have loads of options of being able to do this. So these are just some of the ways that you can use these tire pressure monitoring systems. And remember, £350 is such a different price point than what they used to be, that as far as I'm concerned, if you have the opportunity of putting these into your cars, everyone should have them, just from a safety point of view, let alone any other kind of advanced sort of information that we are just about to get into once we've worked through this. So I did promise to be able to say I was going to set this up from scratch. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to do a configuration together. Now I'm going to use an AiM Solo 2DL so that it's not too complicated as we go through. It's nice and quick. But if you have an AiM Solo 2DL that you're gathering a lot of GPS data for, and you're using that ECU channel for tire pressures, which is absolutely legit and absolutely something you may want to be able to do, then as a result, you have the opportunity of being able to set that up. So I'm going to click on New here, and I'm going to scroll down till I see the AiM Solo 2DL, which I've skipped past, by the way. Have I? Sorry, it's one of those days. Here it is. Sorry. I'm going to click on OK, and that's going to open it up. And I don't need to do it. I'm going to just type in the AiM webinar so I know which one to delete, just in case I get rid of these afterwards. So I'm going to click on OK. And to start off with, you're going to see all of this information that you get just from the device. Now, remember, the device is going to give you information that's held within the little AiM Solo 2DL. So you're going to get GPS-based data, for example, like speed or whatever it need be. And all this information is going to be available. We want to set up an ECU stream. So I'm going to click on this ECU stream. And if you remember earlier, I've already imported in the AiM Technologies CAN protocol. So I'm going to go back to that configuration that I was setting up. I'm going to click on Change ECU, and I'm going to scroll down. I don't even need to, it's right there. I'm going to click on AiM Technologies. If I click there, it's going to show me the TPMS, and I'm going to click on OK. And now, as part of the ECU stream coming into the AiM Solo 2DL, we've got all of these new channels that are available for us to be able to set up, which is fantastic. One button we may want to press, and this is something that I've looked at, I'm like, why aren't I seeing any of my information? Why am I not seeing any of my information? You've got to enable it. So I recommend clicking Enable the CAN bus on the ohm resistor. This just effectively, in my view, turns it on. Make sure you can actually use it. And so you've now got this available to you. I probably didn't click well enough there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to then map this. Now remember, I'm using an AiM Solo 2DL, so the display is pretty straightforward. But I'm actually going to choose this one. And this is the one I'm going to choose because it's got 4 variables. An AiM Solo 2DL has 4 options for pages. And the key variable on each of those pages, it's how many channels are on that page. So this is a 4-channel page. And now you can see that they've all sort of appeared, but there's nothing mapped to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here. I'm going to come down to that ECU that I just mapped. This is the front left, sorry. And so I'm just going to go down here and I'm going to say pressure front left. And I'm going to pick that up and I'm going to drag it and drop it. And then I'm going to do, this one's front right. So I'm going to do pressure front right. And then rear left. And then rear right. So that is a page that I have now set up in my Solo 2DL, that when I transmit this device configuration to my AiM Solo 2DL and it's plugged in to the TPMS system, I will now get these tire pressures that are going to be available to me to have them on screen. And it's as simple as that in terms of working through each of these different variables that you have to be able to work through. Now, one of the things that people often wonder is, well, can I use bar instead of PSI? Well, absolutely you can. You're going to go here and you can just double click on any of the channels and you should be able to change this to any of these units of measure. So you can change it to bar. And you could say, I want that to send me the information 10 times a second, and I can click on OK. So if I now go back to the display, we should see, it hasn't refreshed, but if it does refresh, some of them do refresh automatically, some of it doesn't, you will see this information that will come through in bar instead that you have. The other option that you have as well is that you can also do it in units of, this one's got 2 decimal places, but you can have no decimal place or 1. So if you ever wanted to be able to configure how it shows up, these are the options that you have. So it's straightforward, but at the same time, there's a few steps to go through. But so far, what we've covered is just as we've seen here, we've set up how to set up and bring in the TPMS protocol from wherever you've bought your device, in this case from AiM Shop. We've figured out how to be able to put it on the dash so you can actually see what it actually looks like in relation to the view. And we've also set up how it looks in terms of alarms that you receive when you're out on track, so you know what to be able to do with it. And so far we've sort of very functional. We've helped make sure that we have a very safe, very useful information that we have. But the best part of the TPMS systems, in my view, and it is something that I am just starting to get used to and learn to integrate into a lot of my data analysis, is how do I use tire pressure monitoring data to be able to analyze data better. And so in the essence of the fact that we should carry this forward to another seminar when we get into the data analysis in a little bit more detail, what I'm going to cover off on today is I'm just going to look at some basic data analysis. So I'm going to load up the presentation again. Bear with me just 1 second while I click on present, because I've done screenshots today just for the purposes of today's presentation. I'm just going to flick back to swap the presentations, and I'm going to click forward to the data analysis section. Now, if you think about the data analysis that you want to be able to identify, I think the ultimate questions that we want to be able to answer really are associated with what tire pressure gives me the best grip in the car. And I think in many instances, that's the ultimate question that many of us want to know. Tire pressures for me, I should say, have oftentimes been a bit of a mystery. And I've had instances where people have said, what's the best tire pressure for the vehicle that I drive a Formula Ford in the wet? And some people say, well, I went up to even 40 PSI, and it made no difference against 30 PSI as to what it need be, and all sorts of different sort of conversations. So to have this data at hand will help you start to break down certain key elements of tire pressure information. Now, the first thing I'm going to show you is to understand what tire behavior is like during a session. Because I think it's really important to be able to understand that other question, which is, have you ever heard the phrase or ever thought the phrase, which is, tire pressures will be a bit low on your first lap out. So don't go all out on your first lap, slow it down a little bit, and make sure that you, don't overdo the tires or whatever need be. But you've always known of those drivers. And I think we all know of the sort of the person who's exceptionally good on cold tires, or the person who, whether they've figured out something in terms of what's happening to the tire's behavior during the session. And so this is what this data can give you. It can start to unearth information and take away the mystery of tire pressure information, which I think is a huge component. So the first thing I've got here, this is a screenshot from Race Studio 3 Analysis Beta, and I do a lot of my demos now in the beta, but you can also match any of this in the Race Studio 2 analysis software that is there. Is that this is a view which I stole from Matt, who's on the call, but and that's the beauty of Race Studio 3 analysis. You can sort of share profiles, which is kind of fun. But at the same time, I've got what I call my vehicle health view that I have on the screen right now. And this gives me key information from sessions that I've just run that are particularly useful. On here, you can see, for example, I have what my max RPM was. You'll also notice that I have this thing called an oil pressure alarm. It's a 0. If it was a 1, the oil pressure alarm was on. And this is actually a status variable. If you remember earlier, I was talking about status variables, and you can start to log when they happen. This would give me, if there was a 1 against here in terms of the oil pressure alarm, I could see which lap that oil pressure was actually happening at. And so remember, I'm not talking about oil pressure today, but that's just a status variable. I could have the same thing on here if I wanted to see the puncture, although chances are, because the issue with the puncture doesn't rectify itself on track because it won't reinflate itself, it's less important, but the oil pressure alarm might go away and I still want to know what's happening. I also have that view down here in relation to lateral grip and oil pressure. So I can see, and it's colored for RPMs, red being the highest RPMs. So I can see, for example, If I happen to have low oil pressure in a high corner with high RPM, then there's something I need to look at. But right now, the oil pressure is looking pretty good, so not worried about that. I also have that information here. But what I wanted to be able to have a look at is we wanted to be able to have a look at what is the behavior of a tire during a session, because this is really important. Now, I deliberately chose a cold rain lap on purpose. And the reason I chose that is that tires behave very differently in the class that I'm in wet to dry. I think they do everywhere in terms of what it is, but generally speaking, you don't see a huge amount of pressure change in the wet, but you do, as this will start to show, see a significant amount of tire temperature change, which is one of the things that's interesting is you start unearthing some of the areas, which is sometimes pressure and temperature don't always sort of correlate with each other necessarily, and it's all to do with how much the tire heats up, which is what we've been looking at. So you can see here the first thing, this is the out lap, this goes all the way to 12, 13 laps. The in lap, ignore that, that's just a short lap which is there, but that was the in lap and the lap was shortened, and so shouldn't look there. So the idea here is that we started out this session at 18.7 in terms of tire temp, but we went up to 26 degrees. So there is an 8.8 degree change in tire temps during the period of that session. However, we started at 30.65 PSI. Again, it's very accurate measurement. We put it in to get to 30 and it went up to 31.7. And so effectively there, we're talking about a one PSI change in tire pressure. And so this information is useful as you start understanding what the differences are in terms of how you'd set up the car. Now, one of the things we may be doing here is putting a little bit more air in the tire to create sharper edges to make it cut through the water, and these are treaded tires, and so that might be sort of more of what's happening here, and you do hear of this all the times in terms of if you're running a street tire in a club race for a rain tire, pumping it up higher will actually help you, and I think we're all familiar with different techniques that we have. But what is very interesting is how much the tire temp changes, and tire temp in this instance, does it correlate to lap time? And so these are some of the things that we want to be able to look through. Now, we're not going to look at all the detail today, but the first thing we wanted to be able to do is understanding the tire behavior during a session. Now, one of the things you may be wondering is, well, which tire have you picked here? And for the purposes of demonstration today, I have picked all four and the average of all four tires for pressure and temps. Where you want to get more scientific with this is to be able to pick it by tire so that you can start mapping out what happens to each of the tires during the session. But in many respects, this is a very sort of illustrative purpose of being able to demonstrate what happens overall in terms of aggregate tire pressure or average tire pressure across the vehicle. Again, you'd want to break this down by tire, but I wanted to do this from a demonstration point of view just to show what happens with many of the variables. Now, that's the first thing you can have a look at, which is quite useful. But the second thing we can have a look at is understanding tire behavior and grip. So what I've done now is that if we believe that lateral acceleration, so not necessarily forwards and backwards, but how much pressure, how much G-force we can push on the car on the left and the right, the greater the numbers of G-forces that we're able to exert on the vehicle, arguably the greater the grip level that we have. Now, I am very aware that many of you may say immediately, well, hold on a second, this is a wet session. If it's a wet session, maybe the tires were getting hotter because the track was drying out, and if the track was drying out, you were putting more grip. But if variables stayed the same, and think about this in a dry session, then one of the constants was the track conditions stay the same, and you can start understanding what the grip changes like. And so again, earlier on, it was useful to be able to see what was happening with tire pressure, but at the same time, in terms of in the rain, this might actually work not in your favor in terms of rain information, but at the same time, I do think it's interesting that lap times didn't change dramatically throughout the session. And it's important to write in notes what was actually happening. Was it a drying track? But in this case, the conditions were pretty similar through the whole session. So now we can start looking at being able to say, well, the tire pressures didn't change a huge amount that was there, but the tire temperatures went up. But what is interesting is that we're able to start seeing what kind of grip levels were increased. And so you can see minimum and maximum to indicate right and left in terms of G-forces, left G-forces and right G-forces. And now you can start seeing that as the session went on, the grip levels actually increased as you went through, not by necessarily a huge amount, but they did increase as you went through the particular session. And you can also see that by something called G-sum. Now, we haven't talked about G-sum. It'll be part of a seminar that we do, but there is a calculation that you can create as a math channel or maths channel that will allow you to be able to see how much grip you're getting out of the vehicle. And this will help you identify if you're getting more or less from the vehicle itself. And so you can see that there are sort of variances there in terms of information, but more than anything else, this isn't to demonstrate trends, this isn't to demonstrate anything, it's just to be able to have a little look at how we can start seeing what's happening on grip. Is grip getting better on right-hand turns and not left-hand turns? And really starting to look at it in information. Now, what's interesting is this is, Brands Hatch Indy, which is mostly right-hand turns. And so as a result, it's not unusual that if we looked at individual tires, for example, we'd see differences in terms of the tire pressures on the left-hand side and the temps on the left, from the right, from the front to the back. But at the same time, just wanted to start out sort of some illustrative examples of what kind of data you can look at. But I wanted to leave you today with the last, and this was something that was taught to me by someone who's on this call, which I think is one of the best pieces of analysis when it comes to tire pressures, and I am a huge fan of this type of analysis, which is starting to understand max lateral grip by pressure. Now, what this is first and foremost, you may look at this and think, well, this looks just like a lot of dots on a page. But let's break this down a little bit and start to be able to explain what we're looking at here. This is front left, this is front right, this is rear right, and this is rear left. This is the lateral grip in terms of range that goes all the way from minus 1.5 to plus 1.5 in terms of G-forces that we're experiencing. That's the same on all of these. And then across here, we have the actual tire pressures that the tires were at. Then we selected a series of laps. This is from a different session, so this is from Silverstone National, you can see here. But we selected a series of laps that is here to be able to see a representative sample of all of the laps that were recorded, to be able to see the information of each tire. So every time there is a log of the tire pressure, a little dot appears. Now, the software has thinned this down, so it's not every single dot, because remember, it's taking 10 samples per second, so there will be a lot of dots in the period of a 10-minute session that's on screen. So it's taken a representative sample. But the key we want to start having a look at here is we want to be able to see what is the broadest range of grip at which particular pressure. And to illustrate that, let's think about it in this sense, and I'll go back to that chart for you to be able to identify. What is the pressure? So if you think about the bottom of the axis that you have on each of the tires, what pressure gives the broadest range of grip? Because if you think about it that way, in many respects, what you're looking at now is that if I have a tire that is gripping all the way to the maximum that I'm getting on the left-hand turns and the right-hand turns at a certain pressure, that is the key pressure that I want for that tire. And that is the optimal pressure that I need. And so if we then go back to this particular slide, now start thinking about it, which is, if this is the pressure range of samples, which is the broadest spread of dots that gives you the most amount of grip in each of the corners? Now, this may change based upon certain key elements. And again, this was a wet session that we have. In the dry, these dots are oftentimes closer together. But at the same time, the idea here is that if we look down at this particular point here, we've seen that, let's take this as an example, at this particular point, so this is 29, this is 30 PSI. So let's say 29.2 PSI gives almost the broadest range of grip. Not too dissimilar that is existing here, but it is a broader range of grip that exists. So for this tire, for these sessions, you'd want to set your front right and get it to an optimal temperature of 29.2. So it's a very useful way of being able to look at it. Whereas if you looked at this tire here, you may be able to say, well, these two are very similar, and depending on if it's a left or right-hand turn. So this is quite a lot of right hand. So you may actually want to be able to look at right-hand turns more than left-hand turns. That the range here is in the 30 range. So you may have a different PSI starting here. Similarly, you may have a different PSI on each of these tires. And that's the goal here, is to be able to then say, can I start to analyze where the maximum grip that I'm getting at which particular pressure? Now, this is where it gets very interesting, because now you've got a clue, you've got an inkling, you've got an indication that said it's either an exact tire temp or it's a range. It's a range of temps that gives me the maximum amount of grip that I'm looking for. Now the key is going back to slides like this, because now what you're starting to look at is you want to be able to start identifying how soon do I get to that optimal pressure, and do I go over that optimal pressure as I go through this conversation? So think about it this way. If I identify, and again, I've used rain information here, but when we get into this as the next session, we'll probably do a full session on this for anyone who's interested, is that what we want to start looking at is we want to start saying, if optimal tire pressure is 31 PSI, and it takes 4 or 5 laps to get to 31 PSI, then the question is what's the right pressure that I should start at for that tire to start off with that gets me to that optimal pressure as soon as possible? You can do the same rationale as you think about it with tire temps as well, which when it's cold, temps might be even more interesting to do this analysis with as well, because the goal here is then to start analyzing what you want to be able to do. For example, if you said on a dry day, the optimal tire pressure for grip is 21 PSI on the front left. And if it's 21 PSI on the front left and it takes me 5 laps to be able to get to that particular area, that particular optimal lap time, do I A, put more pressure in the tire to start off with so I have optimal grip sooner in the session, especially if you happen to be in a busy session that might be red flagged after 2 or 3 laps? Or do I put less pressure in to get me to 21, but it will mean that the tire will last for longer through the session because it's not such a high PSI to start out with, that may balloon the tire, and then I lose grip overall? And these are decisions that you will have to think through and be able to make. But if you happen to be, let's say, for example, this weekend, I'm at something called the Walter Hayes Trophy, where there's 100 or so entries. The heats are absolutely jam-packed with cars. And if it was anything like last weekend's Formula Ford Festival, there will be a lot of red flags through the session. So how do I make sure that I plan to get my tires to the optimal pressure as quickly as I can to get the laps done when I can, to minimize the risk of, you know, a potential red flag messing up my session? That might be some of the rationale that I think through. But it's going through these 3 key variables to look at in terms of what's the behavior of the tires, looking at then what the potential maximum grip would be of the tires, and then starting to figure out what's my starting point for those particular tire pressures. Because the other thing that also gets very interesting that this analysis will tell you is that no single tire, depending on the track, should start at the same temperature, same pressure. And so to give you an example, one of the tracks that I race in, and it's a sunny day, someone will say we'll do, 16, 16, 17, 18 in terms of where we set up the pressures, 16, 16, 17, 18 in terms of the wheels that we use. And we've got used to being able to get the car to that particular point. And so it's this sort of analysis that the tire pressure monitoring systems will give you. And I think that as we go through these particular webinars, breaking this down more, looking at with more real life examples is going to be helpful. And so hopefully this is useful to you. I haven't got much more to be able to share with you all today, but I'm happy to start answering questions or see if anyone's got any comments they want to be able to make based upon what they've seen. Are there any questions coming in? Please come off mute if you want, but it's probably best to ask the question in the chat box, and then we can go from there. So one of the questions is, where do we find the profiles? And so as in Race Studio 3 analysis profiles, we can happily share those. I can share you a Race Studio 3 analysis tire pressure monitoring profile if you send me an email. In fact, I'll just put my email address in here, and feel free to send me an email and I will send you the pressures. Next question, will this work on an MXL first generation? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm guessing somebody from the AiM organization will help. Most of the analysis that we're doing here is focusing on the more modern day equipment. So I don't know how many ECUs or whether it's possible to have that. So I'm sure somebody will be able to ask if that'll work on the first generation. Will this footage be available to go back to? Absolutely. So this session is being recorded. and we will have it on YouTube in the next few days so that you can actually go in and look at this details in a little bit more detail over time. Plus, any of the analysis side, we are probably going to plan another webinar to go into more detail as to we can work on that particular area. Any other thoughts or questions, knowing that we're coming up on the hour? Battery life on the webpage listed with at least 2 seasons. What then, recharge or scrap? Good question. Don't know the answer. I think you can replace the battery, but someone, I think James may know from AiM on that one, whether the battery can be replaced. That said, the replacement set, which I have to say, having had mine for a year, they do take a bit of wear or tear when you think about the fact they're coming on and off tires and getting replaced on a regular basis. And so I don't know if the batteries can be replaced, but one of the things that I will say is that probably after a couple of years, it might be better off with the price point there are to maybe put in a set of new ones, just by nature of wear and tear. Fantastic. So if there are no more questions that are coming in, and if there are no more questions that are coming in, and the answer that James just answered is no, they're a sealed unit. So think of it as a sort of consumable that you get for a couple of years and then replace. If there are no more questions, we will end the session. We've got a question lastly come in. Have you ever damaged a sensor? I haven't damaged a sensor so far. I have had to add an extra little bit of sort of like grommet to keep there was a slight leak in the after a first year on one of them, but we easily replaced that and it's been working perfectly in the last couple of weekends. But no, I haven't damaged the sensors so far. I would imagine if you have wheel-to-wheel contact that there is a likelihood that you will damage these, because they are they do protrude. They're quite large in terms of valves, not massive, but at the same time they're notable. Is it difficult to reprogram new ones? No, you can. You get a handheld device, and the handheld device will allow you to map to the receiver, which is the where all the the connects to your AiM sort of dash, and then you just put in the code of your new tire pressure monitoring valve, and it works through. So no.
Just a follow-up question on that one. We have 4 sets of tires, and we use all the sensors. Is it a better way, or is it the way to do it to clone those, or is it better to? Is it possible to have it like programmed, like this is set 1, this is set 2, this is 3 and 4, or is it the only way to do it is to have like a cloned one?
So I've cloned mine, but I don't know. It would be interesting to see if anyone from AiM has a point of view on that one, whether it's in the chat box or the follow up.
It's actually an interesting topic. We were thinking about changing the CAM protocol to allow you to have set 1, set 2, and set 3. But the reason we haven't done it is because obviously in some championships you mix tire sets up all the time. So if you had it as different sets, it would be you could end up with having set 1 mixed up with set 2. So we decided not to do it that way and leave it as clone. But it's interesting to hear the feedback, because we can't have it as, it's not possible to have it as both. It has to be one or the other at the moment. So it's a decision sort of we've taken internally to leave it as it is for now. But interesting to know.
Yeah, we have the clone device also, but it's a little bit hard to use it because you have to put in all the hex decimals for each corner. It would easier be like clone this one with just the one button. That would make it a lot more easy to do.
Yeah. It is something we're looking at. I think the ideal thing would be to have both, so maybe with the hardware can move forward in the future and we can do both, but at the moment it's one or the other. So it might well be something we bring in the future.
I would have a final question. Thanks for answering the other ones. I have a PDM here, and in that case it has to run on a CAN 2. But not alone, in addition to the Blink Marine keypad. How can this work? How will this work? Especially from the CAN protocols?
Again, it will be something that we'll have to do for you. So it would be obviously because we don't have the we don't give out the password for TPMS. So if you contact support, they will assist you in writing the protocol for it to work.
Okay, is this affordable?
Sorry, say that again. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, I lost you. Say that again.
Is this expensive to get that programmed?
Did you buy the system from AiM shop?
It's currently from the German dealer.
Yeah, we would charge if it wasn't purchased from us, but no, it's not. It wouldn't be expensive. Depending on how complex the protocol is, we would quote you on it. We can quote you on the protocol.
So it makes sense to.
Sorry, I lost you again.
It makes sense to buy it at AiM shop. The TPMS system makes it easier.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
No problems.
On that topic, we run in our car. We have the Evo 5 data logger, which we put the ECU on the first and the TPMS on the second canvas. However, we have other devices so that we send out the TPMS data on the output canvas on the first, so that we can share with our ECU. That's the way we have done it.
Excellent. And I mean, I think that from the questions and the conversations, I think many people are really starting to figure out all of the different variations in terms of being able to use these. So I think any feedback is really useful in terms of where that is. But I think for a lot of people, this is sort of just getting into TPMS is for someone like me amazing just to start out with. But it definitely feels like many of you have worked on other different ways of being able to use this, which I think is absolutely fantastic. But I think for most and for many of us, it's answering the unanswerable questions about tire pressure is one of the most amazing mysteries solved in the last few years. And so I think they're brilliant, and appreciate all of the different options and feedbacks and ideas that people had.
Sorry, James, just to jump in, just answering Matt's comment in the chat. Yes, the gentleman who was asking about the CAM protocol for the TPMS with us is just obviously let us know if you have got the Blink Marine keypad from us or from the German dealer, because they do run different CAM protocols. We have 2 versions of keypads. One's available generically from every AiM dealer, and then we also do a keypad from us. So yeah, just let the support technician know what items you've got and where you bought them from, and then we can help from there.
Okay, I will come back by mail to you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, I know we're over the hour now, so I want to say thank you to everyone for attending. I put my email address in here, and anyone who wants to ask any questions, I'm sure just reaching out to the folks at AiM Shop is you'll get an answer pretty quickly as well. So yeah, we'll set up another one of these, but any feedback you might have or any interest in being able to get into more of the analysis, we'll work through that too. But yeah, thanks to everyone for attending, and I'm going to end the webinar right now.